everyone, welcome to case study number 2, which is NMC Company for your pre-September 26 mock. I have already done the debrief for section A, all the three case studies, and question 1 of section B also. You can go on the YouTube channel, search for the playlist, and you will be able to see that. Today, we are going to solve question number 2, which is in relation to your internal controls. It's a classic 20 marker question which comes for internal controls. So we are going to do that, and I'm going to explain to you how exactly should you be approaching such types of questions. All right, so let's begin without any further time wasting. All right, just give me a moment. Right, so first of all, before we, as I did in question number 1 as well, we never ever go ahead with reading the case study first. That's the worst thing that you can do. You should always and always first read the requirement so that you actually know what is the requirement of the question and what exactly you have to find in the question, in the case study, right? And you also get knowledge based questions, so you do not need to refer to the case study for the knowledge based questions. So ultimately we are saving double time, right? So let's read the first requirement. First requirement says list. Okay, so now they are saying list. That means you do not have to explain anything over here, okay? Because the verb is list, so it's very essential for you people to understand these verbs. There's a difference between describe, review, analyze, inspect, list, explain, all of these verbs, right? So list basically means that you just need to list 1, 2, 3, 4. You don't need to explain them. All right. 4, control evaluation questionnaire. So now they are asking, now this is a slightly different question. Okay. Usually you do get that what are the difference between, what is the different types of, question, evidences that you can obtain. So you write narrative notes, flow charts, ICQ, ICEQ, right? You know the meaning of ICEQ, which is internal control evaluation questionnaires. What are these? These are basically detailed questionnaires regarding how the process of the organization is working, right? You ask detailed questionnaires, how many people were there, on what basis are you reviewing the same, etc. So these are the particular questions that you ask. So usually the question does not ask you these things, but over here they've just molded the knowledge based question that you people already know of little bit. So if you have little brain and you use that brain with common sense, these 4 marks are super easy. Okay. Control evaluation questions. So you need to frame questions now that an author would include in an internal control questionnaire to evaluate purchase and payables. So you need to only focus upon purchase and payables. If they're seeing purchase and payables, what kind of questions they can ask. So again, this is nothing that you have learned or anything. ACSA is here testing if you know, if you really know the concept, because they know that if they ask you the definition for ICQ or ICEQ, you would know the definition because that is very widely available and students generally learn that definition, right? But over here they have not asked you the definition, so you don't need to write the definition. That's wasted of time. Instead they have asked you what kind of questions can you ask. So over here you can talk about authorization. So how does the company ensure that the payments that I'm making for the payables or the purchases that I have, they are authorized by the relevant people, or the supplier that I choose are from the authorized list also or not. So I will ask that question. I can also ask, how does the company ensure that all the invoices that they have received from the suppliers are completely and timely recorded in the payables ledger. So all of these questions I can ask from the payables or the ledger clerk. Over here, another question that you can probably ask is, how does the client ensure that if there are any defective or damaged products that we have received from the supplier, how do we reject them, and what is the further purpose of how do we do the receipting, etc. So these kinds of questions you can frame while you talk about purchases and payables. So again, reiterating guys, this question is not difficult. It's just little twisted than what is a knowledge based question that you people have referred to already. Okay. So you have to be ready for such kinds of questions in the exam also. These are not difficult questions. This is just you using your actual concepts in real world scenario, because ACCA is preparing you for a real world scenario. In real world, nobody is going to ask you the definition of ICEQ. They will ask you what kind of question is, are you going to prepare for that? And that is what the question has asked you also, right? So let me show you the answer for this one quickly. Okay, so this is the answer for this one. Any four you can write because it is a four marker, and you don't need to explain these questions. Why? Because the question has said you to just list them. The question has not asked you to explain them, right? So first one says, how does the client ensure that purchase requisitions are raised only for valid and necessary business expense? So you're not purchasing something which is not required by the business, right? That's the first one. How does the company ensure that it is ordering its ordering process is efficient, cost effective? So how does the process seemingly or smoothly work in the organization? That is again your second question. How does the client ensure that damaged or incorrect items are identified and rejected upon the receipt? How does the company ensure that suppliers do not overcharge and that all available settlement discounts are recognized? So these kinds of questions you can write. You can also frame any other thing that has come to your mind. These are just few examples that I have provided to you, and you can add any four out of these, right? So let's move to the next question. So this was a very easy and simple, if you use your brains question, which is going to get you 4 marks. Now, question number 2, in respect of payroll system. Okay, so if we go above, we see that there are three bifurcations that have been given to us. One is a payroll paragraph, another is an inventory paragraph, and then is purchases and payables paragraph, correct? So now the question is only focusing, the first question only focuses on payroll. It does not focus on any other things. It does not focus on inventory or purchase and payables. That means that even if when you read these paragraphs and if you come across any good points, any direct controls, you cannot write that because the question has not asked you that. The question has only asked you from payroll paragraph. That means you only have to write it from there. I am saying this again. Why? Because a lot of students do this mistake that if they read the entire case study, and let's suppose in the purchases I came across a good thing that they are doing, I will write that in my question number 2, which does not make sense because the requirement was only for payroll, nothing else, correct? So we'll do the first question. So in respect of payroll, identify and explain three direct controls. That means positive, good things that the company is doing, which the auditor may seek to place reliance on, and describe a test of control the auditor should perform to assess if these controls are working effectively or not. So you have to talk about direct controls plus test of controls. This is for 6 marks, and you have to write 3 into 2 marks, 2 points, right? Now, one thing I want to talk about, I think I have talked this about in the webinar also that I had. If in case you do not know these concepts really well, you can go on to the Master for September 26 webinar that I had. Day 1 and day 2 is there on YouTube. The playlist is also there. So in that, I clearly explained what these terminologies mean and how are you supposed to write the answers. One thing I just want to again reiterate is that there is a difference between normal course of business, the activities of normal course of business, and direct control. Not all things that the management is doing is a direct control. If I just tell you from a layman perspective, layman wordings, Instagram, Gen Z wording perspective, normal course of business activities is when you are doing something which is bare minimum, right? Which you should be doing. It's not something extra mile that you have gone towards. It's just bare minimum thing that you should be doing for your organization, right? So that is bare minimum. And direct control is like a princess treatment. Princess treatment is when you go extra mile for somebody, right? So that you give them princess treatment. So similarly, if the organization is going 1 mile ahead of what they should be doing, that is a direct control. I'm saying this because a lot of students do get confused between this, and they feel that normal course of business activities of an organization is doing, that is also direct control. I'll give you the examples in the question for this one for sure, but please make sure that you understand this topic really well. All right, so let's go now and read the case study. We'll only read payroll paragraph, and that too line by line, and small paragraphs we'll divide into. We'll not read the entire big chunky paragraph right now. Okay, so let's read the first paragraph first. It is 1st July 25. You are an audit supervisor with Sterling Company, preparing the draft audit programs and reviewing extracts from internal control documentation for your client, Norwood Manufacturing Company, MNC. NMC is preparing for interim audit for the year ended 30th September 25. So our year end is this. We are sitting before the year end. My client is this. Basic background information. Company produces industrial adhesives and sealants. The company has a head office, one factory, and a central warehouse. So this is one head office, one factory, and a central warehouse. These are the three things that they have. Now talking about payroll. So let's deep dive into all of these things. company employs 320 factory workers who are paid weekly by bank transfer based on the hours worked. Now, this is something which is a classic example. A lot of students might feel that this is something that they are doing good because they are paying weekly and because they are paying by bank transfer. But guys, don't you think it is actually the responsibility of the management? It is actually the responsibility of the company to pay their employees for the hours they have worked. Don't you think that's the bare minimum that they are doing? If they're paying weekly, is because this is a manufacturing unit. It is a manufacturing unit. It's not a industrial unit. It's not basically a retailer or like a consumer based product. It's a manufacturing unit, and you people know that labor usually get paid on a day basis or a weekly basis, right? So either it is everyday basis, per day basis, or it is weekly basis. So this is bare minimum. All of the students who have written this, that they are doing by bank transfer so that cash does not get lost. No, my dear students, even if they were doing by bank transfer or cash, that is okay. A lot of companies still now also do it. They pay their employees by cash, and some of the employees do want that in cash. They don't want to go to bank and withdraw from there. They don't want to do that hassle. Some of the employees do not even have bank accounts, right? So even if, like, right now they're doing bank transfer, that's fine. But even if it was a bank transfer plus cash thing, it was okay. It is just the way of paying, which is fine, which is bare minimum, right? So this is not a direct control. So that is why I explained to you that there is a difference between these two. There is no extra thing that they're doing over here. It's just bare minimum. No princess treatment yet. Okay. Okay, let's read the next line now. Factory workers use biometric scanners at the factory entrance and exit gates to record their arrival and departure times. And okay, so if I go till here, okay, till here again, this is a bare minimum thing, because how else or what else would you do so that you account for the attendance of your employees, right? Whenever, if you people are employed somewhere, you would know that when you enter, before you enter the gates, you put on your fingerprint scanners in the biometric, and that records your attendance with your face and etc, and then you enter the office, right? So that's bare minimum, available everywhere, right? But yes, there could be certain issues with this biometric, that probably I'm logging in for somebody else, there's no supervision etc, because there should be, correct? So but till here there's no good point, there's no direct control, this is bare minimum, right? This is one way by which they mark the attendance. They can use other ways also, but this is one way by which they are marking their attendance. So right now it's bare minimum, but they're saying, and this activity, now focus on this, and this activity is monitored by both security staff and CCTV camera. Now you see, they have gone 1 mile extra, actually 2 miles extra, not even 1 mile, they have gone 2 miles extra, and they have had a security guard also and CCTV cameras also, which are checking or having surveillance over this whole activity of biometric fingerprint scanners. Right. So it is not, they're not just stopping at the scanner. They have put under another shield, which is security guard, another shield, which is CCTV cameras. Now, this is a good thing that they have done, and hence this is your direct control. Right? So this is how you distinguish between whether something is a direct control or is it not. You see how much extra have they gone for a particular thing. So over here, because your fingerprint data which you put in over here, for each employee it's unique. It has to be unique, right? So system automatically records every time, everything in detail, from the time taken, when did you log in, when did you log out, etc. Right? So this ensures that only genuine employees have been paid for the hours worked. Let's suppose, say, if I entered the office at 10 a.m., I logged out by 5, that means 9 hours. So I will be paid for 9 hours only. If somebody has logged out before, they will be paid for like 7 hours, 6 hours. So I am paying one to genuine employees only, and for the correct hours that they have worked. So I will be doing correct payments, right? Which will not lead to my increased cost for me, increased wages for me, frauds happening. Nothing will happen. No fictitious employees, because it is also getting reviewed by CCTV camera and security guard. Correct? So two things are happening. One is there are no going to be fictitious employees. Plus, I am only going to pay them for the hours they have genuinely worked. This reduces the risk, one, which I talked about, that your friend cannot log in on behalf of you, right? So that is very, very essential. And because it is monitored by the security guard and cameras are also there, that ensures that the employees are correct. They are logging in for their own self and they are not clocking in for somebody else. So two things. One is that fictitious employees are not going to be there. Correct or genuine employees are going to log in. And second, I'm going to have correct payments being made to them. That is what you're going to talk about. And test of details would be there, that you can obtain footages of the CCTV camera. You can have a review of sample of some of the footages. You can discuss with the security guard and see how he is managing everything. So you can do that, right? You can check. Security guard would also be having sign on the registers or something that he was present there, so you can also check that. That is what this sentence is all about. All right. So let's see my answer for this one so that you get better clarity for it. Again, we are going to follow the same formatting as we did for question number 1 as well, which is what we are going to have. The heading would be there, statement from the question, which is going to fetch us half a mark. If you don't already know this structure, please go on first, watch question number 1. I have explained in detail about that, and then you can come to this question again. All right. Explanation. The fingerprint data is unique to each employee and the system automatically records time of each scan. We know this. This ensures that only genuine employees are paid for hours actually worked. So two things. One is genuine employees. Second is hours actually worked, leading to correct payments being made to employees and company not paying any extra. This is the actual impact that we have to talk about. If we miss on writing this impact, 0 marks. Okay, this reduces the risk of buddy clocking, one employee clocking for the others. This is what I exactly told you people. Monitoring by security staff and cameras ensures that employees do not verify their attendance and then leave or hide to avoid work while remaining clogged in on the system and being paid. That means that, let's suppose, say if I've clogged in and then I go around, roam around the office, I do not do anything, no surveillance is there. So of course people will take advantage of that. But if you have a CCTV camera plus you have security staff as well, then it is going to really help you out to manage that as well, right? That's that. And then review surveillance camera recordings from various dates to verify that sign in and sign out process is being recorded and supervised by the security guard. So from the CCTV camera, I can also see that security guard is present there or not, right? So that is again your answer. So with this, we have been able to, I think now you will be able to better understand the difference between your princess treatment and your bare minimum, right? So this is the first green flag that we have identified. The fingerprint data is unique to each employee and the system automatically records the time of each scan. These records are transferred to the payroll in the real time. So that's another, the continuation of the same thing over here, that it is on real time basis as well. All right, next one. The payroll system calculates gross pay using employees' preset hourly rate. Okay. There's preset hourly rate that, for example, if an employee is a staff, he will get 10 rupees per hour. If it is a senior, it will get 20 rupees per hour. If it is a manager, he will get 50 rupees per hour. So preset hourly rate is there and the system is calculating the gross pay using that preset hourly rate. And the recorded hours up to a maximum of standard 40 hours per week. Overtime is paid at 1.5 times the standard rate. So whatever the standard rate, they multiply by 1.5 and that is when they pay them. For any hours worked over 40 years. So 40 hours per week is the standard that you have to work, right? But if you're working over 40 hours per week, then you're going to get whatever extra number of hours you have worked, you will get 1.5 times the pay that you get for those extra. Basically, it's overtime pay, right? The system automatically flags any employee whose recorded hour exceeds 40 in a single week. List of overtime worked during the week authorized by payroll manager and then entered in the system against the flagged employees to calculate their revised gross pay. Now over here, the system is automatically flagging any employee whose recorded hours are exceeding 40 in a single week. Like And then the list of overtime hours are also hours worked during the week are also authorized by the payroll, the production manager before revised gross pay is processed. Now this is ensuring, now this is a good thing that they are doing, because this is ensured that this control ensures that if you have overtime in place, you are paid for those hours genuinely worked, and it is also properly authorized. If they would have not told us about the authorization portion over here, then this would have been a deficiency, right? Because system, see, there's one thing that it is good that you have automation in place, correct? This is all automation work. This is all automatically calculated, correct? But if there is no review of those calculations, there's a situation wherein those calculations are not correct because system made some error. If system is making some error, you cannot do anything about it. So you should be having some authorization or some review or some approval after the system has made the calculation, so that you see that yes, the system is working perfectly. And that is what they are doing right now over here, right? So correct wages, no increased cost, employee goodwill will also be saved, because what if you are not paying correctly for the overtime? They will not be happy with you, right? So that is also getting saved just because you're doing authorization for the same. So that is your second point that you can write over here. So overtime done by employees. So this is your half a mark for statement from the question. Explanation. This control ensures that overtime is only paid for hours that they have genuinely worked. So that means you are paying correct. There's no increased costs, and properly authorized by requiring production managers authorization specifically for flagged employees. The control reduces the risk of overstatement of payroll costs, fraudulent claims, errors in time recording, accuracy and validity of payroll. You can also talk about the goodwill of employee over here if you want to, right? So that is what you can see. And test of control would be that you can review the signatures of the production department production manager to see if he has genuinely authorized or not. So you can see his signatures over there. Review a sample of weeks through other week and inspect the inspection report. See what number of hours have exceeded 40 hours, and if it has exceeded 40 hours, have you genuinely paid them the overtime amount or not? So that could be your next point over here, right? Let's move to the next point now. So one paragraph, one major paragraph, big chunky paragraph, we are through. So this is how exactly you people are also supposed to go paragraph by paragraph, so that you understand each and everything very, very nicely. Next, each week prior to authorization of bank transfer, the payroll department produces a payroll summary report, okay, showing total gross wages, total deductions, and total net wages by the department. The finance director reviews this report and compares to the budgeted payroll cost for each department and signs the report as a evidence of review. Any variance exceeding 3% is investigated by the finance director, and the investigation is documented in the report. Now, this is actually a very good control. You see, they are putting in so many efforts. This is not just one thing. This is not just one bare minimum thing that they are first, before the authorization for bank transfer actually happens for the payroll. That means that before you actually pay to your employees via bank transfer, you are making one, a payroll summary, right, for all of these things. Then the finance director is reviewing it. Okay, the payroll department is producing, the manager, the director actually is reviewing it and comparing it to the budget, etc., signing the report. And if there's any variance which exceeds more than 3% than what was budgeted and what is actual, they are also investigating and documenting it. So you see, so many efforts are put in place over here. So if the finance director is signing the report as an evidence of the review, that's a good thing, because this will help identify if there's any unusual movements, right? If there are any unexpected movements, something, probably an error or a fraud, something has happened. So you'll probably timely recognize that, right? If you're timely recognizing that, you will make sure that there are no frauds and errors, and hence the payments are correct and employee goodwill is saved. So you're not paying them extra, you're paying them the just right amount. That's one thing that you can talk about over here. Okay. So let's move to the answer. See, I've copy pasted the statement from the question. The finance director signs the report as the evidence. This review helps identify unusual, unexpected movements in payroll due to error, unauthorized overtime, or fraud promptly. That means timely, enabling investigation and corrective action before payments are made. So before you actually make the payments, if there's any differences or if there's any changes you want to make, you can make it previously only before you actually pay to your employees. So both the things, again, two things. One is you're paying correctly to the employees, right? And you are also saving your employee goodwill over here because they are going to receive correct amount over here as well, right? So that is your explanation for this one as well. Let's move to the next point. 3 we are already done. Let's see what else is remaining. Last line. Employees are paid by bank transfer. We already know this. The payroll manager prepares the bank transfer listing, which is then authorized. Okay, so manager is preparing the bank transfer listing. So to whom all we have to pay via bank, which is then authorized by finance director. So finance director is actually approving and reviewing the same thing. The finance director uses a hardware token to generate one-time password to authorize the payment file before it is sent to the bank, which is again a very good thing, that because this ensures that payroll, your payments basically to your employees are only made after your director is authorizing the same, right? And he is also providing you the code, the one time password, the OTP over here, right? So that will make sure that there are no risk of any unauthorized payments being made, that your payments are correct, there's no outflow of cash, unnecessary outflow of cash, and your employees are getting paid correctly, right? You people also are right now, for all the things that you do, you generally do have OTPs, right? That is one step authentication that you do so that everything is fine and you authorize that. That is exactly what he's also doing. So that will ensure that you're making correct payments, authorized payments, and it is not over and above or below also that what you should be paying to your employees. Correct. So this is again one step extra that they have taken. And let's read the answer for this one. This ensures that payroll payments are only being made after authorization by the finance director, and the hardware token provides strong authentication, reducing the risk of unauthorized or fraudulent payments being made. Right. So this was your question number 2, which was in regards to direct controls. I hope that you have understood this really well. We were able to identify 4 good points over here, and in the exam also, whenever they have asked you, let's suppose it 3, they will always give you 1 extra for sure. Correct? So let's move to the next question now. Okay. So question number 3 says identify and explain 5 deficiencies. That means now we have to identify 5 red flags in inventory and purchases and payables. So now the rest 2 paragraphs that we have for inventory, purchases and payables, from that we need to identify 5 negative things that is happening and also provide a control recommendation for it. Now control recommendation will always be from auditor's perspective, that okay, if this is a red flag, what could be my recommendation to you? If you're not following this, what would be my recommendation to you now? Okay, so this is a 10 marker question, so 5 into 2, again the same structure for the same question. All right, let's move paragraph by paragraph now. Let's start with inventory and go line by line. A company holds raw materials, chemicals in a central warehouse. We read above that they have a central warehouse. The warehouse is secured with a digital alphanumerical keypad access, which is great. Only warehouse staff know the code. So only the staff over there, they know the code for the alphanumeric keypad, because of course they would have to know because it is a warehouse. So all the people over there, they have to know about it. Correct. Following the IT department's high security protocol, the code is at least 8 characters long, which is great, uses mixed cases, contains no dictionary words. So again, it is very, very unique password. So till now, you might be thinking this is a direct control, this is a direct control. So again, guys, before, this is another very common mistake that a lot of people do, is that do not read the entire paragraph altogether. Okay, that means this does not finish here, it finishes here, right? So till here you might be thinking this is a good thing that the company is doing, so this is not a deficiency, right? But my dear students, read ahead. This specific code has been in place since the warehouse was commissioned 3 years ago. That means since the time the warehouse has been made, which is 3 years ago, the password has remained the same, which is a problem, right? Because for us also, if you people know, if you people are working on your client, on your client laptop or something, that in the work laptop also, after few months it asks you to change the password, right? It continuously asks you to do that. Even your team's account or something, they always ask you, because there could be a scenario, because 3 years is a long period of time and all the warehouse staff already know it. So probably other people can also know about it, right? Even though it is unique, people can know about it because it is a static password, right? So it increases the risk that you might be having some unauthorized access to the same, to the warehouse, right? Which you do not want, which you cannot have, right? So that is the reason that there could be issues, that your previous employees, they also know the password, who have left the organization, and they might tell their friends that, hey, listen, do you know what is the password for this? And you can steal the inventory from there, raw materials from there, you can steal stuff from there, because everybody now knows the password, they're not continuously changing it, right? So you might be having some fraud, some unauthorized accesses to the same. You can have inventory getting lost, you risk of inventory getting lost, right? Misappropriation of the raw materials that you have, which can lead to increased cost for the company, because now they would have to purchase even extra material with them, right? So these are the problem that can arise simply because you're not changing your password every few months, right? So that is your problem. Let's see my answer for this one. Okay, so this is the answer. Just one FYI, guys, for you people, my answers might seem like little lengthier. It is because I wanted to give you the answers which when you read them, it is self-explanatory. But when you do not need to necessarily write these longer answers. You can just stick to the keywords that you can write. But I have written little lengthier answers so that you even understand from where I am coming from. Okay, I'm written more explanatory answers. All right. A static security code significantly increases the risk of unauthorized access to the warehouse for obvious reasons, right? You will be having unauthorized access to warehouse. Anybody can enter because probably everybody knows the password now. It is 3 years, right? Former employees or others who have learned the code over 3 years period could still gain unauthorized access to the warehouse, increasing the risk of theft, misappropriation of chemicals, leading to increased cost for the company or the operational issue. So this is the actual keyword. If you do not write this, which is impact on company, you are not going to score marks. Okay. Additionally, this could also result in financial losses and potential safety liabilities if hazardous materials are mishandled, damaged, or contaminated. So probably because everybody is coming in, going out, using the material, etc. So because it is chemicals, right, could be hazardous also. So it can also impact from that perspective. So this is little extra perspective that I've tried to give you. You might or might not write it. It is fine, but this is the main aspect of your answer. Okay, now my recommendation should be that it should be changed. The passcode should be, the manager should change the passcode on a regular basis, probably monthly, probably quarterly, so that nobody can learn the password basically, and no unauthorized access can happen, right? So that would be my recommendation. As simple as that, right? Let's move to the next one now. Okay. Just a minute. Yeah. Internal transfers of raw material from warehouse to the factory floor are initiated as needed to meet the daily production schedule. So you do the internal transfers for raw materials to the factory because of course you need to process the raw materials, right? For the as per the production schedule. Raw materials are requisitioned. Requisitioned basically means requested. Okay, requested by the production department using pre-numbered material requisition form. So already pre-numbered 1, 2, 3, 4. So you use pre-numbered requisition cards already over here. Now, the warehouse assistant picks the goods and initials the requisition form to evidence the picking process. So he's picking up the products and is initiating that I will write my initials who has picked the products, right? A second warehouse employee then updates the manual inventory ledger based on initial requested form. So this is the next process, that they update the inventory ledger account. The goods are then transferred to production. Then it is finally gone to the production to ensure all transfers are recorded recorded, the warehouse supervisor performs a weekly review where he matches the total number of requisition forms to the total number of entries made in the manual inventory ledger. Now, what is the actual problem over here is that there is no verification. There's no, review happening. So basically, the problem is that your warehouse assistant is matching the requisition forms to the things, right? But over here there's no verification happening of the things that he is doing. What if he's making some mistakes? Whenever he's picking things up, he's because he's ultimately a warehouse assistant, right? Over here they mentioned warehouse employee. He's updating the same thing. The assistant is picking it up with the initials. So, but where is the review? Where is the authorization? Where is the review check, independent check? There could be errors wherein he's picking the wrong item, wrong quantity, wrong description, wrong quality, poor quality, right? He's picking poor quality products. What about that? Because if you give poor quality goods for production, of course, the end product, the output that you get also, that is not correct, not good quality, right? So you, because of all of these things, you could have misappropriation which could not be found. Then you could lead to your inventory calls will not be correct, your production delays will happen, production quality will get impacted. Probably because of these things you will not be able to produce, and stock outs will happen. Employee goodwill, your customer goodwill will get impacted because they have the demand but you don't have the supply, right? Also because about the quality and everything, your increased cost can also happen for the company, right? So always there should be somebody who is reviewing the work of the assistant, because he is not senior enough and he can do some mistakes. If over here they would have written that he is doing the job but somebody else is reviewing it, then that would have been correct, right? So that is the issue that we have to talk about in this case scenario. Let's see. Okay. So no independent verification is performed to confirm that goods picked by warehouse assistant match the requisition form in terms of the description, quantity before the goods are transferred to production. So he's just picking and transferring. Nobody's reviewing what he's picking, how much he's picking, is it correct or not, quality is okay, quantity is okay, description is okay. Nobody is doing that, right? So explanation: errors in picking the wrong item or wrong quantity or deliberate manipulations would not be detected, leading to inaccurate inventory records, potential production delays, stockouts, unnecessary emergency ordering, leading to increased cost for the company. So this is the major aspect of your answer. So my recommendation over here is that the person, even if he's doing, before he's sending the goods to the production, the supervisor, the manager, they should be responsible to check the picking up process and seeing if everything is okay or not before you authorize the requisition and before you are sending it to the production department for their production process. And the same process should also be signed by the evidence holder, the responsible official, right? So that is your second point, second red flag that we have been able to identify. First was this, second is this. Next. To maintain inventory accuracy, a warehouse supervisor performs a monthly cycle count of a sample of high value raw material. So he's counting if the completeness is there, okay, and compares these to the manual inventory ledger. Differences are noted but are not investigated or adjusted unless they exceed 10% of ledger value. Now this is also not correct, right? The supervisor is reviewing the inventory ledger updates and is performed only on weekly basis, right? Over here the supervisor is checking the weekly updates. Over here he is just checking if it exceeds 10%, right? The warehouse supervisor performs a cycle count and then he's comparing to the ledger for the area they oversee and supervise, correct? But this is lack of segregation of duties, right? Because the same person is counting and updating, right? Over here if you read, they are saying supervisor performs the count, compares to manual ledger, finds the differences and investigates and adjusts only if it exceeds 10%. So that is another thing. But the first thing over here is that what about the same person is counting and reviewing and updating and adjusting? What about that? That is lack of segregation of duties, right? So this is lack of segregation of duties, and the supervisor who is doing all of these things may use the 10% threshold that you have right now to conceal any kinds of frauds that he's doing, any kinds of errors he's doing. He might be doing frauds and errors which is 9%, which will not be detected anyways, right? So different people should be doing this job because it might impact your inventory valuation, your calculation, your accuracy might not be actually correct, right? So this is your third red flag. Let's see the answer. Okay. Yeah. Lack of segregation of duties. So same person is doing the same job again. This represents lack of segregation of duties. The supervisor has custody of goods and may use 10% threshold to conceal the errors under their supervision, leading to unreliable inventory records for the same. Because same person is counting and same person is reviewing and authorizing and using the 10% threshold, which is again an issue. That's a separate issue. We'll talk about that. But this is also an issue. So the monthly physical count should be performed by a team independent of the warehouse staff or a minimum member, a member of finance team, and should observe and perform the test. So count somebody else should be doing, and your authorization or investigation somebody else should be doing who is supervised enough. Right? So that is your fourth point. Fifth point over here is about the 10% thing that we discussed just now. That 10% is also an issue over here, that not all discrepancies are investigated. What if your it is 5 plus 5 plus 5, so 5% discrepancy, 5 plus discrepancy, and 5, so it's 15. It is of course over 10%. So probably there are differences of up to 10% that is in aggregate material, in aggregate problematic, again due to which my inventory valuation would be wrong, my existence would be wrong, right, of the inventory. So that is again what we need to talk about, and that is your fifth point over here, which is in regards to 10% threshold. The differences up to 10% are high in value materials can cumulatively, which as I said, aggregatively result in material misstatement of inventory valuation and existence. A fixed threshold allows for systematic theft or misappropriation to get undetected, because everybody knows that okay, if 10% is there, only then we will get highlighted. So we'll do mistakes or we'll do fraud which is lesser than 10% of the value of the same. Right? So this should not be done. All the discrepancies should be evaluated because they are material in nature. It's not about amount, it is about nature. Right? So that is your fifth point that we have just talked about. Let's move ahead. So we are done with inventory, right? Now let's move ahead to purchases now. Okay. Purchases up to $10,000 require authorization only from the purchasing supervisor. Okay, so if it is up to 10,000 rupees, your purchasing supervisor can authorize it. While orders above 10,000 must be authorized by purchasing director. So they have bifurcated this between two people. That 10 up to 10,000, if it is there, then it is going to be with the supervisor, the purchasing supervisor, and if it is above 10,000, then it is going to be with the purchasing director. During the review of summary of authorized orders, the purchasing supervisor has noted that a large chemical batches, for the large chemical batches, clerks often raise consecutively numbered purchase orders. Example, 2 orders of itna amount for a single order of requirement. That means that if they have a requirement of $15,000 amount products, they will place this in 2 batches, which is 75 and 75, which is little fishy. Why they're bifurcating? Do they not want to get it evaluated by a purchase director? Because above 10,000, this amount should technically get evaluated by a purchase director, right? But this will be get evaluated by the purchase supervisor if they're breaking this up, right? To ensure they're authorized and sent to the supplier within the same hour. Probably their explanation is that they want to get it faster. But that does not really make sense, because the company will lose. Over here, the company will not be able to get their review by the director level. It is a large purchase, so technically you should get it evaluated by the director level, but this will get evaluated by the supervisor level, which is again not fair. Probably there are risks, probably you will be having unnecessary expenditure, probably you're unauthorized, probably the supervisor is also working in collaboration with the people, the team, probably, right? So that is again thing. And one more thing that you can think of from the company level perspective is, whenever we are bulk ordering from our suppliers, they always provide us some discounts, always, right? But if you, let's suppose, say if you order for 15,000, of course they're going to provide you some discounts. But if you split, you order 7,500 then 7,500, of course you're not going to get the benefit of bulk discounts also, because it is not a bulk order, probably, right? So you can also think from that perspective, that it's not correct to bifurcate between two, right? So that would be your answer. Let me show you. Where is it? Yeah. So purchase orders are getting split into multiple smaller orders to bypass 10,000 directors authorization threshold. So probably they willingly are doing this so that it does not get to the director level. It is only subsided by the supervisor, right? The company loses the benefit of director level review on large purchases, increasing the risk of unauthorized and unnecessary expenditure. Additionally, splitting orders may result in missing bulk purchase discounts, leading to increased costs for the company. This is exactly what I told to you, right? So system should be configurable. So you should have automation that if it is automatically flagging such things if you're doing sequential ordering, right? And it should not be happening from the next time, and it should be your all the orders should be placed all at once, even if it is a bulk order or if it is not, right? So that is your PO splitting. Next one. So we are done with 6 already. We were asked 5. We are done with 6 already. And now we are remaining still with this paragraph. Let's read. Okay. When raw materials are delivered, a warehouse assistant checks the quantity received against the delivery note, which is GDN, goods dispatched, goods received note, sorry, and the purchase order, and signs the delivery note to confirm receipt. Okay. But why are we only checking quantity? What about quality? What if the products are damaged? What if the products are not up to the mark? What about that? Right? A sequential numbered goods received note is produced in triplicate. One copy remains in warehouse, one copy is sent to purchasing department, and one is sent to the finance department. That's okay. Right now we'll discuss the first one, which is about quality. What about quality? Probably we're receiving damaged products, and if we receive damaged products, of course we would have to, if we are accepting it, that means we would be paying for it, right? So it would lead to increased cost for the company. Your production would get delayed because the products are not good quality, and probably if you use those products in your production, probably the output is not good enough, and hence you will have customer complaints because the products are damaged, right? Defective, right? So quality should also get affected. Quality should also get tested before they actually do the sale, right? That's that. And then you have sequential numbering, which is fine. So this is your 6th red flag over here. Let's see the answer also. Let me not gatekeep you with the answer. Okay, so poor quality and damage or expired raw materials may be accepted and stored, leading to potential defects, customer complaints, wastage of materials, leading to customer goodwill issues. The company may pay for materials that are unusable, leading to increased cost for the company. This is exactly what I told to you, right? Moreover, unchecked quality issues or damaged materials at GDN stage will result in write down of inventory at NRV at the time of inventory valuation, which can also result to loss for the company, right? So this is again what you can talk about, and recommendation would be that you should also be checking the quality simultaneously. It should be reviewed by a senior person who is probably a director level person who is doing the same. So that's your next answer. Next one. The total of the inventory supplier balances and payable ledger is reconciled to payables ledger control account in the general ledger, and every month by a senior accountant who is independent of the payables function. That's fine. The reconciliation is reviewed and signed by finance controller to maintain efficiency of the month-end close processes. Any reconciling items identified are transferred to a temporary suspense account. If you people remember from your junior classes, in bank reconciliation, we used to do suspense accounts, right? When if we are not able to get what type of balance is this, we put that for temporary basis in suspense accounts to be investigated and resolved collectively by finance team during the final year-end audit preparation. Now, I see a problem over here that why are the reconciliation that I'm happening, why are they not reconciled? The reconciling items between your payables ledger and your control accounts, they're not investigated. They're not resolved on monthly basis. Your bank reconciliation should be done on monthly basis so that you can timely accommodate any problems. But they're getting transferred to the suspense account, which is very weird to me, right? This should be investigated. You should get to know about it. You should resolve it on monthly basis. And then you should address it rather than just spending or just pushing it towards the suspense account. Right, there could be issues. That could be unrecorded invoices, unrecorded transactions, payments delayed. Something could be happening wrong, and that I will not be able to assess on timely basis. Right, so that could be an issue. Probably my payments are not getting correctly mentioned over here. There's some fraud happening, misstatements are happening, etc. So that would be too late for me if I go to suspense account first. So that is the issue that we are going to talk about. So with this, we are done with this last third question also. I've discussed the entire case study with you. I think it was fairly an easy case study if you use your brains while you actually solve this case study. So I hope it is clear. You can also comment down below in case you people have any doubts, any questions. You can also reach out to me on WhatsApp if you have that. All the very best for your exam preparation, and I will see you in the last question video wherein we will be solving question number 3 of section B very soon. All the very best for your final exams.